Hello and good day to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. My name is Dr. Laura Varden. I am Dean of the DNA University and one of the in-house clinicians here at the DNA Company. And it is my delight and pleasure to be here with a frequent offender, Justin Harris, one of our amazing in-house clinicians as well. And my delight to actually, I don't get much of a chance to be able to host with Dr. Tiffany Smith. It is such a pleasure to have you here with your brilliance and expertise in this realm that we are going to be talking about, serotonin and mood, mental health. This is such an important area and topic to be discussing. And we are going to be diving into the genes that affect serotonin production, how it all works. And we're going to get some great information on what do we do about it. Some real clinical pearls in our lives and what we can do to help make sure that we do pay attention to our mental health. We know what we're working with, and we know what to do to make it better. So I would like to say welcome, and Justin, say hi, and then we'll pass the torch.
Hello, everybody. Good to be back on here. What a topic. Serotonin, it's a really relevant neurotransmitter. It does a lot of things in the body beyond just mood regulation. I call it the see the forest from the trees neurotransmitter because I find this theme with people that when they do have dysregulation, be it stemming from genes or be it, compounded from sleep issues or gut issues or whatever, people that have dysregulation seem to have this tendency to like zoom way in on stuff, like be it someone else's flaws, or they tend to be a little bit more hyper noticing of details, which can have its benefits, but it can certainly extend to issues with irritability, mood, etc. So serotonin is kind of one of these balancing acts that we talk about. I mean, you can have too little, you can also have too much, and I know that we'll get into that tonight. But serotonin, I mean, there's multiple things that it's doing in the body all at once, not just are you depressed or are you not depressed. Dr. Tiffany, I can't wait to hear from you tonight because I know that you're an expert in all of the above.
But thank you, Justin. I'm Dr. Tiffany M. Smith. I'm an integrative and functional psychiatric nurse practitioner. I help people get to the root cause of what's really going on with their mental health and well-being. And knowing your DNA plays such a huge role in that. With mental health, we have to understand that everything is connected. Everything is mental health. And so in talking about serotonin, no, that's just a drop in the bucket of your whole mental health picture. But serotonin has such an interweaving in more things than just our mood. And so it's important to understand serotonin and how your body manages serotonin. And I'm looking forward to sharing tonight so we can dig in deeper and hopefully you find some resolutions, some solutions, and you seek us out to help you through your challenges and live a better life for it.
And we would really appreciate if everyone can fill out that poll. We do like to know what is on your mind. How are you dealing with these things? What are you going through? And what do you want to learn more about? And that's what those polls really, it gives us insight to, and to better hone the information that we are providing to you. So that way it is worth your while to be here. So I would like to know, Dr. Tiffany, you had some wonderful insights and some information before we started this. And I would love for you to kick off. I mean, you've honestly given us some wonderful information in your introduction, but to start kicking off the information about serotonin and mental health.
Yes. So when we think of serotonin, we often think of that feel-good neurotransmitter. This is the happy neurotransmitter, but it does so much in our lives. It impacts so it impacts our diet and nutrition, our sleep, not only our mood, but how we handle stress. It is a multifaceted neurotransmitter. And so it's really important to understand what we're going to talk about in these three genes. So what's important that we focus on tonight that I think is going to be fascinating is one, the creation of the serotonin. how it's being created. Two, how it transports and moves within our bodies. And then three, how it's broken down. And so the genes that we're discussing primarily are focusing on those three aspects, and then how we can look differently depending on how those genes are expressed. And understand we'll also be looking at three phases of those genes. We're going to look at fast, we're going to look at slow, and we're going to be looking at balance and what that looks like when those genes are in those different areas. And at the end of the day, it's not about my biology is wrong, my genes are wrong. It's about how we can live our lives based on who we are. We're not wrong. We just need our lives and our worlds to complement who we are. And that's some of what we're going to learn today and be able to share. Um, so the first, Justin, you were shaking a lot. I was thinking you wanted to say something. I was feeling some energy from you. So before I even transition, what were you thinking?
Oh, I was just thinking that we should pull up the poll just so that because I know you're about to give everybody a knowledge bomb, and if we can just see what the crowd is thinking of first, then we can guide the direction of all the brilliance that you're about to drop on us. So thank you, Vanny, for pulling this up. We asked you guys a handful of questions. The first one was, how familiar are you with serotonin and its role in mental health? So it looks like 4% of you says you've never heard of it. Well, now you have, so welcome to the club here. 15% says that you've heard the term, but not sure what it does, some of the nuances there. And 62% say that you have a basic understanding. It's about to be accelerated massively by Dr. Tiffany, so that's great. 20% said, I know it well and have researched it. Fantastic. Welcome to the webinar. So the second question that we asked is, have you ever experienced challenges related to mood, sleep, or anxiety? I would be in this first category. Yes, frequently. This is something that I've dealt with as well. And 47% of you are in that same boat. 40% said occasionally, and that's perfectly common. You know, everybody's going to experience it on some level. And then 7% said rarely, and 5% said never. You are masters of chi. That's unbelievable that you've never experienced that. Number 3, have you ever done a genetic test related to mental health or neurotransmitters? 44% said yes, 35% said no, 16% said planning to, and 5% said that you didn't know that was possible. Most of these genetic tests that you see out there don't have like an executive function profile like we do, right? So it's one of those things that, you know, the DNA company added on purpose because it's got trickle down effect into everything else that we could possibly talk about. How does your brain work? How does your neurotransmitters work? That's a huge area of health that needs to be given its respect and its credence. So we do that. Number 4 is, what are you most interested in learning during this webinar? 71% natural ways to improve serotonin. And that doesn't necessarily mean up it, right? It can also mean lower it in certain circumstances. And we'll get into the weeds a bit there. 45% said how serotonin impacts my mood or my sleep. 56% the role of genetics in mental health. 51% personalized supplements or lifestyle strategies. Great. I'm right on board with you guys. 45% said understanding neurotransmitters more deeply. Phenomenal. The last question that we asked is, would you like access to a genetic test or a personal report after the webinar? 18% said yes, definitely. 27% maybe if it's affordable. 25% not sure. And 29% said no, thank you. Fair enough. So that's kind of where people are at in our audience tonight. I'm glad that we have a little bit better idea. Dr. Tiffany, before I interrupt you again, please continue with what you were saying.
All right, so let's start with the creation of serotonin. And I like to throw it first to Dr. Varden to go ahead and break down that first gene and what's it all about.
Absolutely. So, like my colleagues have already explained, serotonin is a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical messenger that helps control the mood. It also helps control your sleep, appetite, memory, and even digestion. So the thing is, when we're talking about serotonin, about its genesis, how it is made, it starts with food. And when you eat your food, the amino acid tryptophan Okay, so tryptophan is found in things like turkey, eggs, cheese, nuts, okay? Very high in turkey, actually. That amino acid gets converted or changed into a substance called 5-HTP, and that's through an enzyme of TPH2. That stands for tryptophan hydroxylase 2. And that may sound somewhat familiar because this gene you will find in your mood and behavior section of your DNA 360 reports, okay? So if you have that up in front of you, or if you're looking for it, or if you're replaying this, listening to this at another time, you want to look in your mood and behavior report. And so the TPH2, that turns that amino acid tryptophan into a substance called 5-HTP. Now, from that 5-HTP, that another enzyme converts that into serotonin, that neurochemical, that feel-good brain chemical. So what happens after serotonin is made? Well, serotonin, your brain stores it in nerve cells, in that presynaptic nerve, okay? So nerves are nice and long, and they've got a head, and then they've got their tail, and then the tail ends are next to another head of a neuron. And that space in between where the bottom, the end, the tail end of this nerve, called your presynaptic nerve, and your postsynaptic nerve, the space there is called your synaptic cleft. And so the serotonin is stored in this end nerve, okay? And then when you have a good feeling, when you feel calm, when you have are being exposed to stimuli, serotonin, that neurotransmitter, is released from this end nerve into the space, into that synaptic cleft, and then will attach to a receptor on this postsynaptic nerve. And that's when it delivers whatever message it is. And generally, it is in that feel good and will promote that feeling, that emotion, or that chemical reaction. So when this happens, that the serotonin has to be recycled. Okay, so this is what we call uptake, reuptake, that recycling of serotonin after it's finished its job. So what ends up happening is this, the cell up above that released the serotonin, there's actually a transporter that brings it back in to be recycled. Well, that transporter is actually a SERT gene, but the 5-HTT-LPR gene, which you'll see in your reports, controls how fast that recycling happens. And depending on if you have a short version, so if you have an S, or if you have a long version, L, that determines how quickly the cleanup is. And if the cleanup happens too quickly, that could actually cause some mood problems, especially if serotonin is taken away too soon. But generally, and that's usually for the short version, long version does a little bit better job of letting serotonin stick around. But we also have to be careful about how long it sticks around, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. So the next thing is the breakdown, the cleanup. And this is that third gene. So we talked about TPH2, which helps create serotonin, 5-HTT-LPR, which helps with the recycling, okay, the reuptake. And now we're talking about the breakdown, that cleanup. So when there's leftover serotonin that doesn't get recycled, it gets broken down by an enzyme called MAO, monoamine oxidase. And so this is that MAO gene, and that controls how active the enzyme is. So if MAO works too fast, it could break down serotonin too quickly, leading to low levels of serotonin in the brain. But if it works too slowly, you can have serotonin building up, which can cause other problems like mood swings, sensitivity, especially to certain supplements or medications. So why does all of this matter? Well, that's because these three genes, they work, if they don't work well, your serotonin system might be out of balance, and that can affect how you sleep, how you feel, how you handle stress. And that's why people with certain gene types might need a different diet, lifestyle, or supplement choices to stay in balance. So that's the quick and dirty of it.
That was fantastic. I think that I love the hands and giving the visuals. So I think that you painted an excellent image of the process. So I want to go back and dig a little bit deeper into the genes themselves. So with the TPH2, that's what you say, that's the synthesization of the
Yeah.
serotonin. Now, a lot of you already have your DNA test. So if you have the genotype TT, that's the optimal enzyme function and serotonin production. You're more resilient, have your mood under control most of the time. That's what your gene is for serotonin. You're good to go as far as the creation of it. Now, if you have the GG, you have a reduced enzyme efficiency and it actually produces less serotonin. So you're more likely to feel depleted, irritated, foggy, unmotivated. And then if you have a TG, you have a moderate production, not too little, not optimal. And so a lot of times just some lifestyle changes can help to maintain the mood balance. So when people come in a traditional psychiatry practice and see someone like me, and they present with these some of these characteristics, there's a acronym actually that we learned in school called SICKY CAPS. Have you been sad for 2 weeks? Have you lost interest in things that used to be pleasurable to you? Do you feel guilt or shame? Have you had any issues with your memory? Is your appetite affected? Is your sleep affected? And we've already mentioned a lot of those areas just talking about serotonin. And so when you come into a traditional psychiatric practice and we hear those words and those areas being impacted, the first thing that we're trained to do is give you an antidepressant, an SSRI. And that's your selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And so thinking back to the images that Dr. Varden just gave us, what it does is it holds that serotonin in that space in between the two cell ends. And there's no consideration if you make enough, if you make too little, or if you have the optimal gene. And so then that medication is going to come in, and that's where you can have adverse effects to it. It may not work for you because there's nothing there for it to work with. It may overstimulate you, or you may have more adverse effects. And this goes back to genetics and the importance of understanding why you also in psychiatry, you hear treatment resistant. And those GG carriers may oftentimes get labeled with that, but they're not producing enough of that serotonin. And so therefore, they're not going to have any results of the reuptake and holding it there because there isn't enough there. And so in our traditional psychiatry practice, these things are not considered. And that's why you get on that kind of revolving cycle of increasing doses, adding medications, and changing out medications. Anything else anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I have one to piggyback on that one, just because also separate to that, we also know that different medications are also metabolized by enzymes, right? So genes encode enzymes, and enzymes are what do the metabolizing of any number of things, be it a neurotransmitter, be it a hormone, be it a medication. And so everything that Dr. Tiffany just said, if you also combine that with perhaps being prescribed an SSRI that doesn't metabolize well independently in your body, that's yet another issue. It's going to up the likelihood of side effects, right? Because if you under metabolize any medication, you have to titrate the dosage up that much farther to get any effect. And the more you titrate up, I mean, you're increasing the likelihood of liver toxicity and different things. Or the opposite would be if it under metabolizes, right? If it over metabolizes, same thing. You've got to titrate the dosage differently, and you're upping the likelihood of more side effects. So that's why we also use the tool of pharmacogenomics, right? Like we've got this great test, PGX, and it really gives you a big, long list of genes that are associated with metabolizing different classes of pharmaceuticals. So you can also get that test at a discount right now, by the way. It's, I believe, $200 off at the moment. But if you are being prescribed any medication, you can test your genes and have it like a big long list to understand, am I going to over or under metabolize this medication? And there may be a medication within the same class that yields a better metabolizing profile for you. So that's the value of that test. It lays it out really simple. There's like green, yellow, red. If you're on one that's red, it's highly recommended that you talk to your doctor about that, because you may have a higher likelihood of side effects because of that.
Okay. And I do want to say, and I do apologize, but a correction for clarification on the alleles for the TPH2, that the G allele is actually considered optimal. The T allele is considered suboptimal. So I just wanted to make that clarification. So in case people are checking and going, whoa, wait a minute. Because there's also something, and I know I'm getting a little bit on a tangent, but this is important because it is mentioned in the reports that if you have a GG presentation, the optimal presentation for TPH2, and the GG presentation for BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is also optimal, that GG version of the TPH2 actually has an epistatic effect, meaning that just because of the way the gene presents or is, as it reads, it will affect another gene. So that's epistatic, meaning it's not going to change, but it changes the presentation of another gene, in which case, in this case, it is the BDNF gene, making it act suboptimally in certain fashions. But that's just like information, like when you're in your reports and you see that, but we're not going to be diving too much into BDNF tonight. So
yes, but you bring up an excellent point again, how everything is connected. And while we may have one focus on one thing, it can affect others and others can affect it. And so we can't just look at something in one tunnel vision. And that's why we're all here for everyone, because we can see the whole picture and put the whole picture together for you. These are just slight insights to help you get an idea of how some of this can be affected, and I may have an error in my report. So I'm going to double check everything I say with Dr. Parr to make sure what I'm reading is correct. So when we get into the 5-HTT-LPR, you have your short, which is your reduced transporter expression, correct?
yes.
And then you have your long, which is your high transporter expression. So when it's long, it's more efficient serotonin uptake. It's more resilient under stress, but it may clear serotonin kind of quickly. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got to fact check my notes. And then with the short, you have less serotonin reuptake, kind of like your own built-in SSRI, because that's what the SSRI does. It prevents the reuptake of the serotonin, so it stays in the space in that synaptic cleft longer, so that you can have more benefit from the serotonin being there. However, you can become more reactive if this is off kilter, and you can have more emotional stress, higher levels of anxiety and depression under stress. Anything else anyone else wants to add to that?
I love adding stuff, so I might as well go ahead and add something. I think that another interesting component to this is the vicious cycle that can take place. I mean, we know that, serotonin operates on a cycle, and there's a release, and then there's this reuptake, and it kind of goes around and around in this revolving door. And if you have a shorter 5-HTT-LPR receptor, then that means that the whole cycle is kind of going quicker, and there may be less serotonin available in the first place. When you have, mood dysregulation going on, another thing that can happen is your cortisol can end up elevating because you're grumpy, right? And you're perhaps have a negative internal dialogue. It may be impacting your sleep, right? Which we all know what that does. It raises your cortisol. And different neurotransmitters, they kind of potentiate one another, and so do hormones. So if your cortisol ends up elevating because you've got dysregulated serotonin, and that's the trickle-down effect, the elevated cortisol can actually downgrade the serotonin that much farther, right? Or it's just going to compromise your gut, right? Because we know that cortisol compromises secretory IgA, and that's one of the main gut defenders. So now you've got gut dysbiosis potentially going on as well, which is where a lot of serotonin is in fact created. So I'm just wanting to highlight that these things tend to compound, and you need to have the right interventions in place. I mean, when it comes to what do we do about it, I always recommend stress reduction techniques and really balancing the HPA axis there, because it can compound an already existing genetic predisposition towards serotonin dysregulation.
And that's huge. You can take that HPA axis, that stress response, and put it next to any kind of physiological issue that you may have. So as we talk about a lot of things like perimenopause and menopause and infertility and all of these things, we're all talking about stress management. So it kind of is said a lot, stress management, and it just seems like, oh yeah, stress management, yeah, go breathe somewhere or something. But it is so important. Just taking time for you, having that breath work, doing things that you enjoy. A part of what I teach is in resilience is kind of cranking up those things that bring you joy when you're under stress. Because guess what? That's the first thing that goes. And also, when we just mentioned in serotonin, when you're having stress, you lose interest in things that used to be pleasurable to you. So you have to keep tapping in. Just starting with some gratitude can help shift your serotonin, being out in the sun. So if you can't do anything, you're like, I'm not going to do nothing. I don't feel like do nothing that makes me happy. Go outside and get some sunlight. If there's nothing else you can do, you don't have to do anything but open a window and walk outside the door. So stress management is so huge. It disrupts everything, your thyroid function, your sleep, everything. It's just one of those things that the house of cards falls. So we can't stress that enough. Go ahead.
I wanted to bring up the point that, we're talking about the feel-good molecule, happiness, things like that. But serotonin also works that's almost agnostic. It manages incoming stimuli, or the lack thereof. I mean, really, what happens, when we're talking about incoming stimuli like light, sounds, emotions, social situations, all of these things, for people who are dysregulated in their 5-HTTLPR or in their ability to clear or work in the serotonin pathway, that can actually cause more anxiety. And it is something where it's hard and it takes more energy to prioritize the incoming stimuli. And this can actually cause fatigue, overwhelm, stress much more quickly. And you can think of it almost like your brain is an airport. Okay. And stimuli, the things that you hear, feel, see, are planes coming into land all at once. Now, without an air traffic controller, things would get overwhelming and stressful real fast. And serotonin acts like that air traffic controller, helping to keep that brain filter to slow things down, to respond more calmly to those incoming stimuli. So the thing is when you're unable to do that, say you're not getting enough serotonin, or you're not transporting it very well, you're not clearing it and recycling it as well. It's again that overwhelm, and it takes more energy, which can fatigue you. And this can happen, I know, because I'll say I have 2 S's, that in places where there's a lot of noise, a lot of energy, airports, malls, places like that, you can become overwhelmed, feel that, like all over the place, like you don't know what to handle first. So using techniques to help manage that so you can interact with a busy world or with situations going on, or if you've got a big project, how do you start taking one bite at a time instead of being overwhelmed on where to start? It's something that you constantly have to work on. I know, because I have to do this. So, calling myself out on that. Also, it affects your sleep. It affects the time that you're supposed to be resting. And this is something that I would love to have Justin speak a little bit more into, because when you are trying to sleep, if that dysregulated serotonin pathway, If you do not have a dark room, if you do not have it quiet, light coming in, your eyelids are very thin. Any light, your brain is going, oh, stimuli, wait, time to wake up. And you're more apt to wake up throughout the night. This is why we say dark room, eliminate that situation or that incoming stimuli. Or sounds, if you have a refrigerator or a freezer coming on, those mechanical sounds can wake you up. This is where like a white noise machine or a pink noise machine is wonderful. Or, movement like your spouse or partner is pulling, the blankets over your body, and just that feeling, that physical sensation is enough to wake you up if you are dysregulated in your serotonin pathway. So Justin, why don't you take over and give a little more insight into that?
Yeah, so I like to relate this to the primal mechanism, as I often do with these kinds of things. And the way I look at that is that, in ancient times, someone had to get up in the middle of the night to check for that rustling in the bushes, or, that smoke that you can smell from the distance, or just whatever it is that may have caused that high alert, right? That state of high alert. In the beginning of this call, I called it the see the forest from the trees neurotransmitter. And the reason I did that is because I have this thing where I tell people that are dysregulated to zoom out, right? When they start talking about situations, I'm like, zoom out on that, zoom out on that. Because when we have SS and we're dysregulated for serotonin, you tend to zoom way in, right? So see the forest from the trees, obviously, meaning like, listen, if you zoom way in on one insect, on one tree, it's very easy to say that's ugly, right? But if you zoom out, and the forest itself is absolutely beautiful. So people that are zoomed way in need to actually practice that and work at zooming out. This is, impactful within things like relationships, right? You have a beautiful person that you're in love with, but they have some really irritating habits, right? People that are dysregulated for serotonin are more likely to zoom way in on those habits. Meanwhile, if you zoomed out, this is a beautiful forest, right? And it's better to have that perspective. And Dr. Laura and I have this dichotomy because I'm an LL. Mine is more or less regulated, and she's an SS. So even in our staff meetings, like, she's noticing all these details and she's asking all these questions, and I'm just chilling because I'm able to totally zoom out on the situation, So it's a funny thing, the presentation and the whole thing. How that is going to impact your sleep is that, of course, if your brain is that much more perceptive to stimuli, it's going to be so much harder for you to stay asleep when the first little sign of light or the first noise, a siren in the distance. It's because your brain and the survival mechanism there is actually on high alert and almost looking for a reason to wake up. I find it's pretty common as well with people that wake up in the middle of the night and they go to the bathroom or whatever. Just the little bit of light coming off the oven timer, or you just, your tenant in the basement is cooking something in the middle of the night. It's like it fires up the brain and it kind of gives you that reason to stay awake. So sleep architecture, I'm telling you, that's one of the main things that helps you with the serotonin profile, like having really, really good sleep hygiene. Because also, let's remember that cortisol will wake you up as well, right? So cortisol, I mean, the minute that blue light hits your eyes, it kicks the cortisol mechanism on, and it's going to suppress the serotonin that much further. And serotonin also synthesizes into melatonin. If you don't have enough serotonin, you don't have some of those raw building blocks that the melatonin needs in the first place. So I work on that a ton with people, right? We do, the blue light blockers in the evening. And I'm a really big fan of this carb backloading trick that I talk about as well, which, assuming that your genes are laid out for it, what I do, and this actually helps me even though I have an LL, is I save my carbohydrate meal till the very end of the day, right? So I've only got one meal per day that actually has any level of carbohydrate to it. All day long, I'm in a state of not ketosis, but like nutritional fatty acid oxidation. And then the evening meal is where I up the ante with some starches. And that can actually help to give you, some serotonin, and then it converts to melatonin. And next thing you know, I'm yawning and I'm ready to go to sleep, So even your food can be serotonergic and can be useful for improving sleep quality. And there you go. Sleep quality is better. Now the cortisol HPA axis discussion is balancing itself out. You guys ever mess around with tactics like that, or am I a crazy person over here?
You're right on topic. I mean, that's what comfort food is, right? The comfort food is their serotonergic food. Also, you said SS, and I wanted you to say what SS was for those that are learning more. You described it, but just kind of, you know, say it again, just what the SS was.
Right. So these different presentations of the 5-HTT-LPR gene, you can have these different kind of combos to it, right? So the S and the L, those are the two alleles that we look at. And you can either have LL, like I have, so that represents the kind of longer receptor. You can have LS, which is moderate in the middle. Some may still consider that dysregulated, especially depending on what your TPH2 and your MAO looks like. Or you can have SS, which is what Dr. Laura has, and it's like the shorter presentation of that receptor. And that's typically what we would consider to be more of a dysregulated profile at a baseline. That's, of course, just the gene, and you can always do something about it.
Well, and I do have to say, it's not all bad because, again, we have to remember that our genes express the way that they express is really based on the context, because it's not that there's necessarily a good or a bad presentation, especially in the mood and behavior. It really is the context in which it is, because the SS version, the short version of the 5-HTT-LPR and other aspects of that, because I do have the optimal TPH2 as far as serotonin, production and, moderate clearance. So that helps to balance it out, but it can be a superpower being an SS or having an S in there, because like Justin had mentioned, I pay attention to detail. I catch all the little things that a lot of people generally will miss. And this can be very useful into knowing where genetically you are more predisposed to where your superpowers can come from. So it has served me very well being a scientist, because in the lab and doing the experiments, detail and precision is paramount. As far as time, money is concerned for the university, for the lab, for doing these things, you don't want to be screwing up. So all of, paying attention to that detail, catching those things. A lawyer reading through, which also I'm a paralegal, but reading through, legal documents, you want to catch every little I being dotted, T being crossed, so this can actually help you into figuring out what is the best thing for me, where are my strengths, not just in what you enjoy, but even genetically. Because I've worked with pediatric clients where their parents were like, hey, I want to do the best for my child. I want to know, how does their brain work? What is best, for them in learning in school, and what would, how do they think, or how will they be thinking, genetically influenced, and, what type of sports are best for them or would work best for them. And we can see that in that genetic blueprint. And it's absolutely amazing. So don't think of it like, oh crap, I'm broken, there's something wrong with me. Heck no, turn it around and make it a superpower.
I love that so much. And I love the superpower thing, because I'm thinking about how we think about Spider-Man, and he had the venom from the spider and all of this. There's this reaction, this chemical reaction that has occurred, or this thing that has happened. And so when you look at your genetics, you're looking at that formula for your superpower. And then when you understand that, you know how to present yourself in life. So you, like with Batman and Spider-Man, they have their way of being a superhero. Now you have a genetic pathway that tells you how to be the best you that you are. And when you don't feel in your spirit that alignment with what you're doing, it could be because it's not in alignment with who you are and your genes and genetics. Like you just said, Dr. Varden, you are a perfect example of using that SS. So know that this is all about learning you and how you can be the best you can be, not what the world considers the best or normal or right or wrong. It's so specific and so customized to you. And when we talk about things like destiny and walking in your path, this helps you from a very scientific, precise way know exactly who you are and what you should be doing. One other thing, when you were speaking, Dr. Vargan, you reminded me that how serotonin is a mood stabilizer, and the airport thing was beautiful. I love your visualizations. You're a visual learner, aren't you?
Yes, and teacher.
And teacher, right? And in psychiatry, though, when we're talking about the serotonin, and you present with these different extremes, it's easy for someone to consider that you might be bipolar because of the extremes of your serotonin and the dysregulation in your gene. It's easy with someone can just, in psychiatry, we ask questions, and depending on how you answer them, they're going to slap a diagnosis on you without any scientific evidence or proof. And so it's easy to get a label that is not correct. And it's unfortunate, in our mental health arena. And so we want to make it better. We want to get the word out and help our mental health practitioners learn more about these things to get to that root cause. So know that taking a deeper step, bringing the reports and talking with your providers, working with our functional genomicists will help you to find the better you and be the best you can be. All right, so we already dug into this a little bit, but let's just share a few more things that we do that can help in these circumstances, depending on where you are or no matter what's going on in your genes, that are just going to be good for you to do. Let's start at the top from the creation, where we talked about eating turkey, all the way down to ways we can support if we are getting rid of that serotonin too fast. Any additional things?
Definitely diet is a great place to start. And really anything that's relative to gut health has a large amount of connective tissue there. I have noticed a bit of a trend, and I don't mean to be offensive to anyone who's on more of a plant-based approach with their diet. There's some people that still works great for. However, I mean, a lot of animal foods are really where you're going to get the predominant sources of tryptophan. And it's not difficult to get if you eat even a normal amount of animal foods, right? Like, I don't think that you have to go supplementing with tryptophan and things unless there's a real problem there. But just knowing the diet and knowing what you can do to support your gut health, like we have a great test called the Gut 360, and it can tell you a lot as far as if there's any sort of dysbiosis going on there. I'm a big fan of food sensitivity testing. I'm a big fan of mucosal barrier assessments. I think keeping an eye on things like histamine levels as well in the gut is very useful. So prioritize the gut. I'm not one of these people who says all disease begins in the gut. However, I do think that the gut is one of the areas that modern living is compromised in a lot of us. And it's going to make it difficult for a ton of different neurotransmitters to really have the building blocks that they need. Your gut is your second brain. So if I had to prioritize anything beyond sleep and what we've already talked about, get that gut right, and you'll see that you have a better mood and better cognition, no doubt about it.
And I think that a lot of people may have heard that there's a lot of serotonin that's produced in the gut. And yes, the gut produces significantly more serotonin than the brain. About like 90% of all of the body's serotonin is actually synthesized in the gastrointestinal tract. And for those nerds out there, it's actually by the enterochromaffin cells of the intestinal lining that make it. So anyway, had to get that little nerdy part in. So the remaining 10% is produced in the brain by neurons in what we call the RAFE nuclei and other areas. All right. So what's really interesting is that your gut contains roughly 10 to 20 times more serotonin than your brain. All right. However, it is important to note that your gut, the serotonin that's produced in the gut cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So the brain must produce its own supply for the neurological functions that were going on, for the things like we were talking about, mood regulation, sleep, cognition, all of those wonderful things. But when we're talking about gut serotonin, so what's the purpose? Well, primarily it regulates intestinal mobility, secretion, and inflammation. It also plays a role in things like nausea, appetite, and communication with the brain through the vagus nerve. So And it does that through that serotonin molecule. Even though it itself does not travel between the two organs, it triggers an informative, communicative reaction to give that information, that gut-brain information transfer. And this really explains why the gastrointestinal issues are often correlated with mood disorders, and why, like Justin was saying, that we call the gut the second brain, because there are actually, it's really interesting because there are 10 to 20 times more neuronal connections, communicative connections, going from the gut to the brain than there is the brain to the gut. It's absolutely fascinating.
Awesome sauce. Well, we are in the final 10 minutes and like to see if we have any Q&A.
All right.
Looks like we've got a few. I can start us off if you guys like.
Please.
So Jenny has a question. Any strategies for teens with significant mental health concerns that have no massive red flags on DNA? Whew, that's a tough one, right? Because that's a time when those hormones are just cranking. There's a lot of anxiety just socially. It's a really transformative time for the body, you know? So to me, I mean, I have this principle that I always bring up on these webinars that I call moving from general to specific. And I always start with the basics that the human body really requires prior to getting into the more really like zoomed in health hacks and different things. So what I would say, and you know, depends if they're male or female as well, but some level of exercise, some kind of anti-inflammatory practice, hydration strategies, hygiene strategies. There's so many different things going on. I mean, I would get them involved in breath work, like Dr. Tiffany mentioned before. That's free and it only takes a few minutes. You know, grounding, get them with some sort of detoxification strategies. Gosh, there's so many different ways that one could take a question like that. I suppose my real advice is have them reach out and have a session with me, because I can look at their DNA as well and understand if there's any underlying imbalances there. But I think the general to specific principle applies here, like really getting them with their basics, right? Get their diet right, have their sleep proper. Don't wake them up too early either, because teenagers really do need their sleep. And it actually sucks that school starts as early as it does, because I'll tell you, teenagers are going to have a difficult time with cognition when they have to wake up earlier than their body was ready for. Ladies, anything to add to that? There's so many other pieces of advice that you could give, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. Teens, this is a major time period in their lives that their hormones are changing. You know, especially for females. Well, I mean, males too, but you know, and there could be so many different things with the hormonal changes, and that includes the hormone vitamin D. Okay. Again, this is something that when we're talking about mental health concerns, it really is beneficial to look at the entire picture, all of the genes, not just, you know, the serotonin pathway, because there could be other pathways, other deficiencies with what's going on that can definitely affect and show up as mental health issues. And that includes toxic overload, heavy metals in the brain, or mercury poisoning. That can definitely affect mood and behavior. So yeah, try not to be too myopic. And this is exactly where working with a professional who can work at figuring out where the root cause is and start, you know, supporting what's necessary.
And I would say the first thing is start tracking how you're feeling. How's your sleep? Start tracking what you're eating and your activity level. Start to get that data about you so that you can share that with your practitioners so that they can have a better understanding of where you are and to help you get where you want to be. A lot of times we say, yeah, I eat good, you know, but maybe you eat out 3 times a week, or eat a lot of of starches, or eat a lot of this or that. And so when you really take note and chart on yourself, track yourself, That's going to be very, very important information to help guide the treatment plan or next steps for you. And you're going to learn a lot about yourself that you didn't even know or didn't think was true.
So I'm going to jump in and take the next question by Sue Nordemo. By the way, hello, Sue. So good to see you. So
Hey, Sue.
Yes. So she's asking, how does serotonin affect migraines? Well, serotonin actually plays a very key role in migraines by regulating blood vessel tone and pain signaling. So when you have a low baseline serotonin level, it actually increases migraine susceptibility. And serotonin drops during an attack, and that can lead to that vessel dilation and pain activation. And I know that there are medications like triptans that target serotonin receptors to relieve migraines and genetic variations in serotonin-related genes that can influence someone's risk for migraines. But Dr. Stephanie, I'd love to hear any input you have regarding migraines and serotonin.
Oh, oftentimes I'm not in this area of dealing with the migraines and serotonin. I'm often in a hormone space. And of course, that's connected, but I'm not really versed in that migraine piece and the serotonin as much as you have. I understand its relationship to pain in general, and I often will discuss stress management and that resilience training, serotonin building type of thing for the individuals, which indirectly helps the migraines and whatnot. So that's my approach to it.
Justin, do you have anything to add?
You know, there's so many potential sources for migraines as well that can compound the serotonin kind of underlying mechanism there. Like, honestly, just basic hydration tactics with high quality minerals have been pretty effective for me with lots of my patients. You know, there's a sleep element. There's also like air quality elements as well. If you have suboptimal GSTP1 and perhaps you don't have good air filters in the house, all of those things are of relevance there. I'll tell you, I'm a really big fan of something called Brain Tap as well. And it's like uses photobiomodulation as well as binaural beats and meditation tracks and things like that. And that in and of itself, just having the light going into your ears and different things is actually proven to be pretty effective with that kind of thing. I really recommend broad spectrum minerals and proper, you know, tactics there. Detoxification strategies can be useful there as well, right? Like a good just infrared sauna strategy, upping, you know, glutathione levels in the body, maybe a little bit of cold exposure. If your body's really inflamed or your body's really toxic, I mean, your head is going to have that feeling as well. So it's not serotonin related advice, but more migraine general advice. I have seen so many people, and I'm not lying, just were dehydrated, and that was the source of a lot of their friggin' migraines. So like using Beam, right, using good sea salts, having a good magnesium source, all of that can play a role. And then a lot of it's inflammation as well, right? Like having a good quality omega-3, curcumin, like some of these anti-inflammatory strategies can also be of use there. But migraines are terrible, so I feel for you. That's one of the most brutal things to have to deal with. It just impacts you so poorly. So you have my sympathies.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God,
So,
2 minutes or so. Anything else?
No, actually, I was going on to the next question. Nina is asking, how do you increase serotonin receptors naturally?
There's a few ways, right? I mean, you can do things like there's something called exercise-induced neuroplasticity, right? And this is also to do with the BDNF pathway, but increasing the literal intelligence of your body through various forms of exercise can help with a lot of these different things. So I recommend some of the basics, once again, moving from general to specific here, having like a good varied exercise program with different like athletic movements, pushing, pulling, jumping, stretching, right? All of those things together can increase some of the things that help your brain with that neuroplasticity. Anything that's great for your brain, right? I mean, omega-3 is great for the brain. We know that there's nootropic ingredients that can be useful there. I think that we just need to be a bit careful with some of these things like St. John's wort and, you know, ginseng and nutmeg. And there are a few things that can put you into that kind of hypermethylation realm where you may end up with too much serotonin or, anxiety there. So again, relying on the basics, right? Exercise, sauna, etc. That's what I recommend. Ladies, do you have anything kind of more specified than what I just mentioned?
No, I love that. It just reminds me how I've added doing some landscaping development in our home, and I'm doing all these new activities and exercises and ways that I'm moving that's different, and how you feel so proud, and you feel better. So just doing something new, doing something different, adding boxing, Pilates, barre, something new, something different that gets you moving. It's That's one way to build that serotonin receptors.
Yeah. Also, omega-3 fatty acids and vitamin D, they're important for optimal serotonin production and receptor function. So, I mean, unfortunately, there really isn't any well-established direct methods to naturally increase the number of serotonin receptors. But certainly, these lifestyle nutritional strategies that, we've been talking about definitely helps to support healthy serotonin receptor function and possibly receptor density over time. But there isn't a lot of research out there that has specifically, looked and measured, the counts, as far as receptor numbers. So.
Yeah, I should also mention that, some of these micronutrients that we talk about, or hormones like vitamin D, they directly play a role in the synthesizing of serotonin as well, right? So, like earlier in the call, when we were talking about there's tryptophan and then 5-HTP, and then serotonin, there's little facilitators of that. And that would be like B6 and magnesium, right? Vitamin D. These things play a role in that whole process. So were you deficient in one of those things? And out of all of them, I would say magnesium is a pretty common deficiency as well. That can really interrupt that conversion of tryptophan into 5-HTP and then further into serotonin. So just shoring up some micronutrient deficiencies, I think can go a pretty long way there as well.
I agree so much. The vitamin D, the magnesium, all of those things we are normally super deficient in. In addition, they also offer some neural relaxation to that agitation we may have when we're having some issues with our dysregulation of our serotonin. Magnesium in particular, you can take that in the evening. It can calm you and help you rest. It can also help with your hormone regulation. So the vitamin D, also, I can say the same things. So just a lot of things that we just naturally know are better for us or know that we're deficient in, or what our bodies are like, you know what, we need to do more of this. We got to listen to that sometimes and act on it. So listening to yourself is huge and what your body's cueing you to do.
All right, so Talia is asking, she was a little confused. She thought that for a short 5-HTP-LPR means poor reuptake, meaning serotonin sticks around longer. The long version means serotonin reuptake is efficient. And she said there's been some different things said here, and she just wanted us to clarify and confirm. So actually, Talia, you're correct. So the short allele, that short version, leads to lower expression of the serotonin transporter. So as a result, the transporter protein is available to reabsorb serotonin from that synaptic cleft back into that presynaptic neuron, the one with the finger, okay? So when that happens, because it does not take it back up as easily, serotonin stays in that synaptic cleft longer, and its concentration there is higher after release. However, over time, this can actually lead to a compensatory change in the brain that may reduce overall serotonin signaling. So this is like a feedback loop that happens. So that's where maybe some of the confusion could have occurred. And then as far as the long allele, that version results in higher expression of that serotonin transporter, that reuptake. So more transporter protein is present, serotonin is removed from the synaptic cleft more quickly, leading to lower serotonin levels in the cleft and a shorter duration of serotonin signaling after release. So yes, there you go. All right, on to Sharon. She's got the question. How do surgical procedures contribute to dysregulation of the enzymatic action that produces and recycles serotonin? So do either of you want to take that? Are you familiar with?
I don't have an intelligent answer to that personally, but if one of you does, feel free to fire away.
Nothing's coming to mind in that question. I don't have an answer at this time. What comes to you, Dr. Barton?
Yeah, well, I would say if we're talking about general surgical procedures, okay, where my brain is taking this question is thinking that surgical procedures triggers that fight or flight response. That can lead to a massive release of stress hormones, especially cortisol and adrenaline, okay? High cortisol levels can actually suppress TPH2, that enzyme that makes 5-HTP from tryptophan before it goes into serotonin. And when you're talking about cortisol, that also increases tryptophan breakdown. It's down a different pathway, but it makes less tryptophan available for serotonin. So really the result there is that less serotonin is made due to the enzymatic suppression because it's the resource is being diverted elsewhere. When you're talking about surgical procedures, inflammation, your immune activation. Well, surgery causes inflammation. And even when everything goes right, you are going to have inflammation, and the immune system, as it activates that healing response. So during this inflammatory response, inflammatory cytokines are released. They can inhibit serotonin production. The cytokines can actually further push away the tryptophan away from serotonin, from that pathway, and toward things, what they're called neurotoxic byproducts, like quinolinic acid, things like that, especially if you have gene variants in other certain genetic pathways. So again, these enzymatic pathways are redirected, and that increases the risk of mood disorders post-surgery. Those are things, I mean, outside of like nutrient depletion, because surgeries often result in blood loss, there's temporary food restrictions, it disrupts the gut biome because a lot of times in surgeries you are having antibiotics, all of those things can deplete key cofactors for enzymes, like you need B6. It's needed to convert 5-HTP into serotonin. It's depleting magnesium, zinc, iron. Those are needed for TPH2 activity and MAO function. So, between all of those things and how it affects the gut, and then you put on top of that all the medications that they give you post-surgically. Opioids suppress serotonin signaling and MAO activity. SSRIs, that could interact poorly with anesthesia or pain meds. I mean, just, kind of layer on everything. So that's where my mind goes. And actually, this is my SS version coming out. So anyway.
I love it.
All right, so Talia has another question, and she says, can you explain the difference between too little serotonin and too much serotonin, and how that manifests differently in behaviors and what that can look like in your genes? I think this is fantastic because I think that we could dive a little bit deeper into that. Who wants to take that question first? Dr. Stephanie, did you want, Dr. Smith, I'm sorry, did you want to talk about that? Because you had mentioned about too much serotonin and how that can present.
Yes, and I had some notes up and I lost them. Give me just 1 second so I can make sure I speak to this appropriately. In the meantime, did anyone else want to start?
Yeah, actually, I was going to say, while you're looking that up, Susan B asks something specifically for Justin. She says, what food sensitivity test does Justin like?
Yeah, so there's a couple that I'm a fan of, and really it's come quite a long way from what it used to be. And this is not about allergies, right? It's about intolerances. So it's really something that's going to cause that immune reaction at the level of the gut that might not necessarily manifest as like hives or closing of your throat or something like that. It's more of just a micro, just inflammation that's going to be present there. And it kind of keeps your immune cells on alert and looking and circulating. So the one that I look at, it's actually a blood test, believe it or not. You would think it's a stool test, but this is actually usually like a finger prick. And I'm a fan of two companies, and this is doing what's called an IgG test. So it's an immunoglobulin G. If you're in Canada, the one that I would recommend is from Mosaic Diagnostics. That's in the United States as well, but it's basically IgG as well as Candida species. Or there's another one called Oxford MRT. That's a mediator release test. And that's even better than the Mosaic one as far as some of the things that it actually covers. But that one is, if you're in the United States, that's the one I would go for, just because you're going to get a little bit more data than you do with Mosaic. But Mosaic is fantastic, and that's the one that I took. And it gives you a big, long list, like 190 different foods. And it very simply puts it into the three categories. It's green, or it's yellow, or it's red. If it's red, I recommend staying away from it for a 12-week period at least to see how your gut and your brain as well will react to that. But those are the two: Mosaic Diagnostics, IgG, and Oxford MRT.
Wonderful. Thank you. Dr. Smith, do
Yes,
you have information for Talia's question?
yes. Now repeat the question so I can answer it adequately.
Absolutely. So she asks, can you explain the difference between too little serotonin and too much serotonin, and how that manifests differently in behaviors and what that can look like in your genes?
Okay, so yes, I had to recall and be refreshed because I was going down other tangents in my mind. With too much serotonin, that's where you're going to have someone who's really irritable and angry and even impulsive when you have too much serotonin. And that's where I was saying sometimes a practitioner could also consider that being kind of bipolar-ish and put you on mood stabilizers in the psychiatric realm. With someone that doesn't have a lot of serotonin, they may cry easily. They're easily hurt. Um, they don't have that resilience when stress occurs, when trauma occurs. So they're more sensitive. So that's how those two would present. Um, Anything else I've left off that question?
Well, she had mentioned about what that can look like in your genes, but I know that we had covered it with the short and long version, the clearance, the MAO, how quickly that leftover serotonin clears. So I think we've already covered that. And we do have more questions we need to get to. So,
All right.
Talia, I hope that answered your question satisfactorily. Thank you for asking. So we have another question from Nina, and she's saying, as a nutritionist, I believe that for good sleep and good mood, we should make a milk plus banana plus peanut shake. Is that okay?
Sounds delicious. I think that there's no reason why not, except for the fact that some people are not equipped to deal with each and every one of those ingredients, right?
Right.
So, like in the genetic profile, we look at a gene called MCM6, which is relative to lactose tolerance. I mean, granted, you could get lactose-free milk, but for some people at the level of the gut, that may not be the best option to where you may want a dairy-free alternative, right? Like a coconut milk or a nut milk or something like that. As far as the peanuts, I mean, listen, I love peanut butter with all my heart, but it does have some lectins and things like that in there that some people have reactivity to. And if the goal is to improve your mood, but you have something that's an irritant at the level of the gut, it may have the exact opposite effect. I mean, stemming from what I just said regarding food sensitivities, some people just based on food sensitivities have brain fog or achy joints or skin problems or whatever it is. It can really end up manifesting in a lot of different ways in the body. And bananas, absolutely great source of potassium. I mean, there's good things in there, but some people can't handle fructose as well as others. I don't really have anything wrong with that, but I'm a fan of personalizing the ingredients with any smoothie that you make for anybody, just because in our realm, there is no one size fits all, right? So I think that it's more something that I would personalize different, what's it called, recipes to.
Yeah. Well, and I think really what she's talking about is it's leveraging the nutrients, the synergistic effects of tryptophan, magnesium, B6, healthy fats. All of these are linked to improved sleep and mood. So really it's based on those nutritional factors that, you know, if you do have any allergies or intolerances to dairy, peanuts, or whatever, finding the alternatives that are high in these micronutrients and amino acids and making sure that those are blended. But, you know, if you can handle and enjoy the milk, banana, peanuts, go for it.
I
So
could say for me, I've found that I needed that having some magnesium in the evening, having protein and a healthy fat, and then also putting my feet up on the wall to decrease the cortisol is a good remedy that works well for me in the evening. So it's really individualized.
yeah, and I mean, there's even some supplements. Like I love doing magnesium threonate at night because the molecular size is so small that it crosses the blood-brain barrier to help with energy production and all the wonderful things that magnesium is needed for in the brain, you know, to be able to do all the work that the brain is doing while we're sleeping. But I do like leaning into whole foods first. So by the way, Justin, the next question is for you. Well, actually, Lydia says, Justin, can you please look at my report and explain it to me? So I think that you've got a client coming your way. So Lydia, I definitely would recommend you reaching out to our client care and talking to them to see about hiring Justin to read your report.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. And also, our man Bill is in the background, and he's someone who can direct you appropriately there as well. But the answer to your question is absolutely, and I can't wait to meet you.
So our next question is from Cindy, and she asks, how does shock treatment help a major depression mother with all of the SNPs and bad gut too? So, Dr. Smith, how is this something that you ever deal with in your practice or have seen, or how would you deal with that?
I have not connected the shock treatment with the SNPs and whatnot. In my mind, they're separate at this time in how they work, but I know all things work together and they're all connected. But I have not, a lot of people are doing that transmagnetic stimulation, which is kind of like the newer version of shock treatment. And I haven't brought those together yet and how they work. I think my thought process is leaning more into our lifestyle and whole foods and understanding our genes. And that's going to help that refractory treatment resistance approach because now you're dealing at the root cause. So I would focus on your root cause solutions and then see what improves as you continue with your current treatments, shock treatment.
Yeah, and I would say that when it comes to a treatment like that, now granted, it may not be physically invasive in like surgical procedure, but it is still quite invasive. It's works on the system very strongly. And so I definitely would recommend make sure that you are working with a practitioner who has knowledge and experience in this realm that you trust. And if they have knowledge and experience in the genomics realm, even better. Working even in a team that has a functional holistic doctor that can also work into gut health, that foundational work that Dr. Smith is talking about, that really is going to be the best way to approach that. But definitely you should have a team, a very knowledgeable, experienced team behind you to be able to work through something like that. I appreciate you asking. So, our final question of the night is by Terry. And Terry is asking, any relation of serotonin to vestibular migraines?
Ooh.
So, Justin, I see you unmuting yourself.
Well, I was gonna say, I mean, we've touched on it a little bit, but I mean, serotonin absolutely plays a role in the pain modulation pathway, right? So, um, I think that it probably does have some significant connective tissue there. As to the real details and specifics, I'm not familiar, but serotonin does a heck of a lot on that pathway as well. So I'm sure that there is connection, and the real solution would be the same thing, right? I mean, it would be optimizing the serotonergic pathway. If you do that, then there's going to be that much more support when it comes to migraines. But I mean, the rest of the strategies that I mentioned earlier are also totally applicable here, right? And same with even our last question about depression. I really try not to look at n=1 stuff when it comes to this, right? Because I mean, if you have migraines or you have depression, it's like every system we talk about has interplay there, right? Like we need to make sure your methylation is optimized. We need to make sure your detox is optimized, your micronutrients, your sleep, your gut. I don't think that there's one system in the body that doesn't directly feed into the next one, right? Like I've used the analogy of the butterfly effect on these webinars before, because it's like, that movie, the Ashton Kutcher movie, where it's like a butterfly flaps his wings on one side of the world and it causes a hurricane on the other side of the world. I don't think that science is accurate, but the analogy serves here because, like, really, let's say you do have HPA axis dysfunction. Or let's say you got in a car accident when you were 5 and your spine is out of alignment. And so the nervous system, which runs from the back of your head down that spine and feeds the intelligence into your adrenals, right? That just a simple chiropractic adjustment can help with adrenal function, right? There's all kinds of connections here within the body. I mean, who knows where the actual like underlying problem is? You have to look at your genes and you have to really treat the body holistically in all of these circumstances. That's your best bet, and that's what my actual advice is treat the whole body and see what shakes out.
If I can get a little bit more granular, though, when we're talking about serotonin and the vestibular system, okay? Well, during migraines, like I had mentioned before, serotonin levels typically drop significantly. That can trigger both that pain and vestibular symptoms. So we're talking balance, the dizziness, okay? And because the vestibular system has serotonin receptors, it's the 5-HT1 receptors, okay? So when serotonin levels fluctuate or drop, it can really affect the inner ear function and that balancing process. That's what leads to the vertigo, the dizziness, that spatial disorientation that is very commonly characterized for vestibular migraines. Now, as far as, things that can be done, a lot of times they'll do medications, the triptans that I was talking about, which is a 5-HT1 receptor agonist that can actually abort or stop the attacks. And of course, there are times that, SSRIs, your select serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that basically is stopping that reuptake back into the presynaptic neurons to have the serotonin stay in the synaptic cleft longer. Okay. And those can help prevent them. But again, whatever it is, if you do have those, obviously, I would hope that you are working with a practitioner and, they are following this, that you are keeping track of when this happened, the triggering events that cause this. But when we're talking about a gut connection, remember I said 90% of serotonin is made in the gut, and digestive issues can potentially influence vestibular migraine patterns because some people will notice that those vestibular migraines correlate with gut problems, with triggering from certain foods or even getting into hormonal issues, estrogen fluctuations. often affect serotonin levels. And that can sometimes explain why those types of migraines happen during certain times of the month for women. So yeah, absolutely, there's a connection between serotonin and the vestibular system. And I totally geek out on this because neuroscience is one of my specialties. So don't mind me. So we have come to the conclusion of those questions, although I just noticed that Mark has a question in the chat. And we
Yeah, I was in the process of typing it out, but it's way easier if I just answer it right now.
Absolutely. So Justin, why don't you take it away, voicing his question and then answering it.
Yes. So the question is, he says, I know this is off topic, but it really isn't, right? The butterfly effect means that nothing is truly off topic. Regarding the food sensitivity tests, right? So he says, if you have something in the red category, does that mean it's recommended to stop consuming this food for life or for 12 weeks or so and then reintroduce? So the way I look at that is that the terrain of your gut itself can really be a big factor in how many food sensitivities you have, right? And food sensitivities are not the same thing as genes. It's not like, well, here's the gene, here's your genotype, and that's what you're always going to have. It's actually more dynamic than that. It can actually move. You can acquire food sensitivities and you can somewhat eliminate them as well. So I've worked with people where they've done a food sensitivity test and then we did all this beautiful work on their gut. They took peptides and did bone broth fasts and, circulating different probiotics and all the different great things that we do for the gut. And then they took the food sensitivity test again. And it's like a reduction in what it actually was. But you have to at least give it that 12-week window where you don't have any of that reactive food whatsoever, because it's very healing. It's part of the healing process, the reduction of those foods. And I mean, you might have, the carrot antibody, but not the broccoli antibody. And for whatever reason, right, your gut specifically is reactive to this food versus that one. So as part of our healing process, it's in your interest to go ahead and restrict or completely remove, preferably, the things that your immune system is reacting to. We do a bunch of work on your gut, we let it heal, and then you can do that test again. And hopefully it's such that it's a reduced list to where you don't have to cut it out forever. It may be one of those things where you can introduce it a little bit as even a hormetic stress, right? I mean, there's this idea of molecular hormesis where it's like sometimes the introduction of just a little stressor keeps your immune cells kind of circulating and on guard such that they're ready to take care of a real bug, something that might come around. So we don't want no bad bacteria, for example, in the gut. We don't want none. We don't want zero, because it's a form of hormesis, right? Like we want the body to have just a little bit of stress in there. But as an experiment and as part of our healing process, absolutely, I would cut it out for 12 weeks, see if there's any difference in symptomology, how you feel. I recommend keeping a journal, some way to actually keep track, and then do the test again. And you may be able to add some of these things back in, especially if it's a favorite food of yours, then it's worthwhile to at least try it as an experiment.
Well, I definitely want to say thank you, both of you, for your brilliance, your information, your answers. I want to say my particular thanks to everyone who joined us here this evening. I would love to see, real quick, if you guys could pop in the chat, what's one thing that you learned tonight? I want to make sure that the information we are giving you is actually doing something for you, that your return on investment for spending the time with us in these webinars are actually coming to fruition to educate you and empower you more in your genetic journey, and that we can do that. I don't know, do we have the chat turned off, or?
We got a lot of thank yous and great webinars and stuff, so that's definitely good.
Yes, well, I do. Oh, it is on. So yeah, please just, something, just, let us know what you've learned tonight. We really appreciate that. Beautiful. That you two friends could, Sue, you are such a dear. I love you so much. Wonderful. This is too. My Siri just came on. That is too funny. Wonderful. Yes, I love it. So Deborah said that serotonin serves many different purposes in the body and the mood. Beautiful. Nina, to exercise more. Yes, you feel flush serotonin, but no receptors. Beautiful. This is wonderful. Thank you, everyone. And thank you again, Justin, Dr. Smith, for being here tonight. We absolutely enjoy all of the information, and for Vanny and Katie and our CEO, Tracy, and Bill, you know, rounding us up. We could not do this without you. It really is a team effort. And oh, thank you, Cindy and Mark. Wonderful information. I'm so glad that you are learning more. Excellent. I appreciate you. And with that, I would like to allow my colleagues to say their good nights as we round out our next and this webinar.
Thank you so much, everybody, for showing up. And I'll be here tomorrow as well. So I'm hoping to see as many of you on the next call as humanly possible. We do this because of you. So thank you guys so much for rolling up.
Thank you all very much. Great job, everybody.
Thank you.